Under the sterile lights of the high tribunal, her chained form dragged across the cold floor, echoing through a hall not meant for mercy. She didn't speak. She didn't stumble. The 4 guards who escorted her seemed far more uncomfortable than she did. Whispers buzzed among the galactic delegates like static interference, not one of them meeting her eyes for long. The rumors had already arrived long before she did. They said she held a front line with no army. They said she walked into orbital fire and came out without a scratch. They said the Dominion only captured her after executing half her village to lure her in. And she came willingly. Now she stood before them, wrists bound in alloy chains designed to suppress kinetic output and muscle strain. Supposed to work on humans. Supposed to. One of the guards noticed the chain faintly vibrated where it wrapped around her skin. He stepped back. The High Arbiter's voice broke the air with ceremonial authority, announcing her as Human Subject 41N, war criminal, subversive entity, and threat to galactic harmony. No name. Her name had been scrubbed, erased from archives, forbidden to be spoken. She raised her head slowly, locking eyes with the Arbiter. "I'm the reason you're scared," she said. Calm. No anger. Just fact. The silence that followed was not out of reverence, it was shock. No prisoner had spoken uninvited in millennia. The Arbiter flinched, recovered, and continued reading her charges. Inciting rebellion. Leading unauthorized resistance. Damaging Dominion infrastructure. Defeating elite units without formal training. Refusing mind reconditioning. She listened to the list like it was weather. She blinked once when they accused her of corrupting youth with forbidden ideals. When asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she nodded. "You're all so desperate to call me dangerous. But you had to erase my name first." The hall held its breath. "You want obedience. What you got was memory. That's what scares you." The Arbiter slammed the gavel, signaling death protocol. But one voice rang out from the warrior caste pit, low and rumbling. "Challenge code." The tribunal turned toward the speaker. Corrin, the Empire's undefeated enforcer, stood from his seat. Towering, blue-skinned, armored in ritual bones of past victories. His expression unreadable. "I invoke right of measure," he said. "Trial by confrontation." Gasps rose from the observation tiers. The code hadn't been invoked in generations. It was ancient, binding, and unalterable. "She is not of noble caste," another delegate objected. "She is legend," Corrin replied. There was a pause. The Arbiter hesitated, but the law was clear. She would face the warrior in single combat. The sentence would be delivered based on outcome. They unbound her chains but left them hanging from her wrist. Corrin approached to escort her from the hall, but she raised a hand. "I walk myself." He didn't argue. As she exited, the crowd erupted, not in cheers but with fear. The old rituals had been reawakened by a human. Whispers spread across the halls, across systems. Aliens in distant sectors replayed her words through bootlegged feeds. Some scoffed. Some repeated them like scripture. The record-keepers, whose only job was to chronicle, felt something shift. Not in politics, in weight. The galaxy didn't know her name, but it knew her presence. One of the younger scribes, barely out of training, dared whisper to an elder, "What if she wins?" The elder didn't answer. He simply closed his scroll and looked toward the arena being prepared for the combat. In private quarters, the High Command convened. They had expected to break her spirit publicly. Instead, she had turned their ceremony into an origin myth. Some wanted to override the code. Quiet execution. A fabricated record. Others knew better. If she was silenced now, she'd become immortal in a different way. And some had already begun to wonder what would happen if she didn't fight to win. What if she fought to wake them? In the lower corridors, among the commoners and workers, a different conversation was brewing. They remembered stories their ancestors told, stories of humans who had once allied with the galaxy, who had bled for planets that weren't theirs, who had walked into extinction without a scream. "She walks like them," a miner said. Like she's already made peace with her death. She walks like she wants us to wake up, another replied. In a quiet bunker deep below the judicial complex, a defector pulled out a smuggled file. Grainy footage. A human, possibly her, lifting debris from a crashed freighter, saving alien children while her own arm burned. He watched it 3 times before sending it to 3 contacts across 3 systems. When she stood in the arena the next cycle, she didn't scan the crowd. She didn't posture. She looked at the chains still hanging loosely from her wrist. Then she looked at Corin, who stood ready with his weapon, a ceremonial blade that had never drawn human blood. He watched her stance, unorthodox and open. Not offensive. Not fearful. "Why didn't you kill the guards when you had the chance?" he asked, voice low. "Because they weren't the ones who needed the lesson," she replied. "Are you here to fight?" "I'm here to be seen." He nodded once, then lowered his weapon slightly. A show of respect. She made no move. A horn sounded, signaling the beginning of the confrontation. Neither moved. The crowd shifted uneasily. She took 1 step forward. Corin inhaled sharply, not because of threat, but because the ground beneath her feet didn't echo. The arena absorbed impact. Her steps still rang out. "Your stance is wrong," he said. She shrugged. "So is your history." He charged. Not full speed. A measured attack. Testing. She stepped aside without striking. The crowd booed. The arbiter stood to call off the challenge. But then Corin halted mid-stride, looking at his blade. Her chain had coiled around it. Not tight. Just enough to show she could have disarmed him. She let it slide free. "I came in chains. Not to fight. To remind." The silence that followed was heavier than applause. Corin stared at her, expression unreadable. Then he knelt. Gasp. Screams. Officials scrambled. Corin placed his blade at her feet. "She wins." The tribunal exploded in uproar. But they couldn't change it. The code had been answered. More soldiers stood up, one by one, kneeling. Some out of respect, others out of fear. None out of obligation. She said nothing more. She walked out, chains dragging behind her like banners. In the corridors beyond, riots broke out. Not from anger. From revelation. Files were accessed. Stories long buried reemerged. The Dominion's narrative began to fracture. She didn't lead them. She didn't need to. She had been seen. And in being seen, she made them remember. Corin's decision to kneel did not just violate centuries of warrior code, it shattered it. The moment his blade touched the arena floor, the foundation of the Galactic Dominion cracked. Shock turned to defiance in the eyes of thousands watching the live transmission. And in that silence, for the first time in generations, hope was louder than fear. The High Arbiter called it treason. Dozens of security drones activated, descending toward Corin and the human woman with weapons charged. But they halted midair. Orders had come from multiple command lines, some to fire, others to stand down. Confusion reigned in the control towers. Protocols conflicted. Drones froze. She turned to Corin. "They'll come for you now." "I know," he said. "They came for you first." Outside the arena, tension rippled like a gravitational shockwave. On fringe colonies, silence turned into movement. Archived human files hidden deep in encrypted vaults were accessed. Some were propaganda. But others? Raw footage. Footage of human medics treating alien wounded under bombardment. Of human soldiers dying with smiles, saying things like, "We promised them we'd stay." Of humans being buried under rubble while shielding children, not even their own species. The people watching didn't cry. They didn't cheer. They simply stared, because it didn't match what they'd been taught. And the woman now at the center of galactic attention looked exactly like the ghosts from those files. In the command chamber, Admiral Trezek of the 7th Enforcement Fleet punched a table as a dozen of his soldiers refused to deploy. They called it a moral refusal. Said they couldn't fire on a warrior who knelt. Couldn't attack a woman whose chains symbolized something more than capture. Couldn't be part of another lie. One by one, sectors began to question orders. Not out of strategy but memory. They remembered the peace treaty signed in the old cycle, an agreement between humans and the Dominion. Buried, erased, denied. Now fragments of that treaty emerged on private networks in public archives. Proof that humans weren't invaders. They had been allies. Until they weren't useful anymore. She was taken back to a holding chamber. Not a cell. Not a throne. Just a circular room with reinforced walls and dozens of listening devices. She didn't speak. She meditated. The guards outside argued whether they should protect her or imprison her. One guard defected on the spot and left his post to join a growing protest. On an agricultural moon, a teacher paused her lesson mid-lecture. She changed the topic from resource yields to history. She pulled out an old device and played a grainy clip. It showed a young human woman, identical to the chained prisoner, shielding civilians during a bombardment. The children in the class watched silently. "Is she the same?" one asked. "Does it matter?" the teacher replied. The Dominion responded with fear. They launched a disinformation campaign across all systems, claimed she was an engineered psyop, a shapeshifter, a false flag. But their efforts only made the people dig deeper. They found the scars in the records, the inconsistencies, and they began to see a pattern. In the warrior caste, debate broke into fracture. Some argued that Corrin had committed sacrilege. Others said he had followed a higher code. He hadn't surrendered. He had recognized truth. The ruling council panicked. They initiated Protocol Harkanis, a failsafe designed to erase high-level threats without trial. But it required activation from 3 command levels, and 2 refused to sign. One of them, a Ziran historian, released a message to the public instead. "I have studied every war, every rebellion, every uprising. This isn't any of those. This is memory correcting itself." Back in the tribunal hall, Corrin was placed in chains. The same chains that had bound her. He didn't resist. He smiled. "Now they'll ask why." The tribunal called an emergency session to fast-track her execution. But before the sentence was declared, an unexpected interruption arrived. An encrypted signal hijacked the council's broadcast. A video played. It showed her, before capture. A barren world. Smoke, fire. She walked through it carrying an alien child. A general offered her passage in exchange for submission. She declined. Instead, she carried the child into the storm. The council shut down the feed. But it was too late. Millions had seen it. It spread like virus data across every screen in every sector. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was proof. Inside her chamber, she finally spoke. Only one sentence. "They fear what I've already survived." A collective of ex-military aliens called the Oathkeepers released a statement. They refused to serve under the Dominion until a full investigation into her capture, the erased treaties, and the human betrayal was conducted. It sparked a wave of resignations. Whole units walked off stations. Some formed protective rings around civilian hubs to prevent Dominion retaliation. She was called before the tribunal once more. They no longer referred to her by number. The lead prosecutor asked, "What do you want?" "I want you to remember who you were before power made you forget." "Do you claim to be humanity's last voice?" "I don't need to be," she said. "I only needed to be heard once." Council chambers erupted in noise. But amidst the noise, a few stood still. Old, grizzled diplomats who remembered the early days, who had known humans before the purge. One of them stepped forward, placing a seal down. "I name her witness. And I name the tribunal fraudulent until proven otherwise." The room divided instantly. Factions formed. Some called for blood. Others for reform. What had started as a spectacle had become a reckoning. Corrin, still chained, was brought before her. They stood across from one another once more. "This was never about victory," he said. "No," she agreed. "It was about truth." In the outer systems, civil unrest boiled. Not violence, clarity. Farmers refused supply orders. Pilots refused warp commands. Scholars began teaching suppressed history. On one moon, a statue of a Dominion general was pulled down, replaced with a crude carving of a human woman in chains. Dominion intelligence flagged it as a dangerous cultural shift. In response, the Dominion activated Section Black. Biological weapon deployment. Target, witness class threat. A special unit was dispatched to her holding location. But when they arrived, they found the guards gone. The hall empty. Doors open. Not broken. Opened from within. She sat waiting. Alone. Unarmed. She didn't resist. She spoke only once. Be careful. You're not killing me. You're proving me right. The operatives hesitated. Then disobeyed. Instead, they knelt. Her chains were removed by someone who once hunted humans for pay. He didn't ask forgiveness. She didn't offer any. They simply walked together toward the exit. Above the planet, warships began to realign their designations. Some changed flags. Others sent encrypted transmissions to neutral worlds. Everywhere, the balance shifted, not from explosions but from realization. In the Central Dominion archives, a forbidden AI reactivated. Not by human hands but by alien command. Its records were pure, untouched. It confirmed the truth. The betrayal. The rewriting of history. The erasure of the human contribution. It was too big to hide anymore. A signal was broadcast from the center of the hall. No music. No introduction. Just her voice. The Dominion had no more illusions. The moment the witness walked free, unguarded, the myth they tried to bury walked alongside her. Entire systems went quiet. Not because they feared retaliation, but because they didn't know what would come next. She didn't give orders. She didn't raise flags. Yet fleets refused to fire. Planets refused to comply. Soldiers refused to march. In the heart of the Dominion command, desperation took root. Strategic meetings devolved into argument. Analysts predicted collapse not from war, but inertia. Entire supply lines stalled without a single battle. The infrastructure of control had been built on obedience. Now, obedience evaporated. The ruling caste initiated contingency operations, biological failsafe, genetic collapsers, designed to release synthetic diseases in key sectors if rebellion reached critical mass. It was a threat, a warning to the galaxy: obey or suffer. But before deployment, something unprecedented occurred. The command codes were leaked. Not just leaked, broadcast. Every species, every caste, every neutral observer saw the Dominion's final play exposed in full detail. The leak didn't come from within the rebellion. It came from Dominion officers who could no longer stomach the rot. Her image now spread without effort. Not banners. Not recruitment. Just quiet footage. Walking without guards. Standing without armor. Speaking without shouting. Children began mimicking her words. Artists sketched her not in triumph, but in defiance. She became the moment people realized silence was a choice. The Arbiter Council collapsed when 3 of its senior members resigned publicly, stating they would not preside over the downfall of conscience. Their departure fractured what remained of centralized power. Each faction turned inward, terrified of being seen on the wrong side of inevitability. The military splintered. Not from mutiny, but refusal. Bases went dark. Vessels floated without orders. Weapons were left untouched. She met with no envoys. She declared no manifestos. She simply traveled from one place to another, listening. In those meetings, no cameras were allowed. No broadcast. Only witnesses. From outer moons to central hubs, leaders of once dominated species asked her the same question. What now? Her answer was always the same. You already know. Revolution didn't look like fire. It looked like a slow turning of heads. Across colonies, once divided factions began working together without waiting for permission. Trade routes re-established. Medics crossed borders. Words in old human dialects reappeared in public. A former Dominion officer recorded a message describing how he'd once hunted human survivors and now couldn't sleep. I thought obedience was peace, but I was obeying fear. She showed me the difference. Dominion leadership, realizing control was slipping beyond repair, made one final attempt. They launched a strike force, not to kill her, but to destroy the archive where the erased human history had been rediscovered. The operation failed before it began. The ships never left dock. Ground crews sabotaged engines. Pilots faked malfunctions. Commanders sent false confirmations. The fleet never moved. With every failed order, the idea grew stronger. It wasn't rebellion. It was awakening. On the neutral world of Thaler, the largest gathering of interspecies representatives since the fall of the original alliance convened. Not under flags, but under common truth. For the first time in centuries, humanity was no longer the pariah. They were the mirror. Delegates argued for hours, some screaming, others pleading, until a single voice asked what they feared most. What if everything she said is true? No one answered. They didn't need to. In a private chamber, a historian from the Zareen caste found a file dated centuries earlier. It was a peace agreement signed in both alien and human blood. Not metaphorical, actual ceremonial blood-sharing. Proof that humanity hadn't just been an ally. They had bound themselves to defend species that later betrayed them. The historian published it without permission. The galaxy read it. Crowds began to gather, not in protest, but in silence. Moments of reflection in city centers, orbital platforms, desert colonies. People simply stood together, not to oppose, but to remember. The Dominion's last broadcast urged obedience. No one listened. A former high general tried to rally troops for a final stand. He was met with empty barracks, weapons left behind, untouched. On his command platform, a message scrawled on the wall: "She fought alone so we didn't have to." Her journey ended not with war, but with stillness. She returned to the place she was first chained, the grand hall where her trial had begun. This time, no guards waited. No tribunal. Only silence. She walked to the center and stood there, chains still wrapped around her wrists. She dropped them on the floor. The sound echoed across the chamber, a sharp metallic note louder than any speech. She looked up at the cameras. Not to command, not to lead. Just to speak. You never needed me. You only needed the truth. Corin, now freed and hailed by warrior clans as the one who remembered, stood behind her. He had spoken only once since the trial. I saw someone with no army force and empire to blink. I saw what I could never unsee. On distant worlds, monuments began to rise, not of soldiers, not of rulers, but of a woman in chains walking unbent. Her likeness carved not in gold, but in stone. Meant to weather time, not shine for attention. The Dominion, now leaderless, was not overthrown. It was outgrown. Structures once used for domination became places of gathering. The word witness no longer meant passive observer. It meant one who remembers, who speaks, who refuses to look away. The last official document produced under the Dominion seal was unsigned. It acknowledged the breakdown of their governance and admitted the failure to suppress the truth. It closed with a phrase that would be quoted for generations: "We tried to erase her name. She gave it to the stars instead." She did not stay. She left the hall quietly, walking alone into the outer territories. She refused titles, awards, planets, and command. She had come not to lead, but to awaken. And she had. In her absence, cultures long divided began to reintroduce forgotten traditions. The concept of unity based not on fear, but on shared dignity. Schools began teaching the erased chapters of human history. Children grew up reciting her words without even knowing her name. Centuries later, a child on a remote world asked a simple question: why did she walk in chains? The elder answered, because it was the only way to make them listen. And they did.